in teams.
Yeah,
like you.
And you could have had the John Cleese show, maybe even instead of Monty Python, even at that point.
I could have done, but it's not what I wanted to do. I love working with teams, because I think if you're working with somebody, particularly writing with someone else, you will get to a place that you would never get to on your own. And I love somebody's nodding there because they know the experience. You'd never get there on your own. With someone else, it batted backwards and forwards. And afterwards, when you get a great idea, you can't really remember who said what, who contributed what to the idea. Just it was the creature that the two of you formed together came up with the idea.
Well, you talk about Graham Chapman a lot in the book, which is wonderful to get to know him because he passed away at 48 and people didn't get a chance to know him. There's been so much that you and all the other Pythons have gotten to do, and people have gotten to meet and know kind of Eric, Michael Palin through his travel logs, and all these guys from different acting jobs and stories and shows they've created. But Graham, we didn't get to know.
Well, Graham was I think he was unknowable. I mean, there were two or three sides to it. First of all, he was a great writing partner for me because I was sitting there at the typewriter, sort of in the engine room, and he would sit there puffing his pipe, and every tick.
She's had enough. That's quite enough of you. If you're gonna mime a pipe, she's walking out. She did not pay for mine.
I upset her? Did I say something she didn't like? Stop. Well, thank you very much.
Hey guys, we did it. We got her out of here.
She's been replaced. Someone
we were talking about Graham, and so much of the book we get to know Graham that we didn't know. And you say in the book you relate a couple of stories of some kind of a haywire side of him that came out of nowhere and you couldn't explain.
It's crazy.
Occasionally dangerous.
Occasionally dangerous, occasionally not quite in good taste, but he could be wonderful. For example, he was once invited, God knows why, to the Oxford University Union. And that's sort of famous because there have been so many British prime ministers who went to Oxford and they all debated political stuff at the Union. And there was a debate at the Union on nuclear disarmament. And for some reason, Graham got asked. It was quite an important debate. I mean, there was a cabinet minister there and someone from the opposition, you know, somebody from the Labour Party, and there were a couple of well-known television pundits who were experts. And when they turned up for the debate, Graham turned up dressed as a carrot. Bright orange, skin-tight costume. You see what I mean? He was supposed to speak for 12 minutes, and when he got up to speak, he just got up and refused to say it. And people got angry and shouted at him. He didn't care. He loved it. He didn't care. And then sat down again, thrilled. He's ruined the debate. That takes a lot of
It's Andy Kaufman-esque.
Yes,
a lot involved.
Andy Kaufman.
I don't understand. I can't do that kind of thing. I can't alienate an audience willingly. I only do it through great effort.
There's a certain type of personality that almost enjoys.
Oh yeah. You know, listen. I've done a lot of stand-up comedy just for fun, but I'm not a real stand-up, and my friends who are stand-ups, they love nothing more than telling you about how they walked the room, about how it wasn't going well, and they were, okay, let's dig in here. And they didn't leave the stage until everyone walked out, you know. They love it. They love telling those stories. That's a real stand-up. And they had that, and I wanted to ask you about, Andy did that great Gatsby thing, Do you know Andy Kaufman?
I know Andy, but
He would read from The Great Gatsby. He would read The Great Gatsby at the comedy club. And until everyone left. Now the thing is, it just sounds like a big stiff arm, but you have to know, John, when he would do it, he would stand and read, Gatsby. I looked upon, and when somebody would cough or get up, he would go, I looked at him, and he was my... Every time someone would walk out, cough, make a noise, he would look at them like, how dare you? But he wouldn't quit.
There was only one guy I ever worked with like that. He was in the review with me, one that got taken out of Cambridge and put in the West End. His name was Anthony Buffery, and he was a research psychologist, and he was a graduate, but he was very funny. He had this very big, very pale face, unbelievably pale with big eyes. And we used to push him out at some stage and pretend that something had gone wrong. And say, I've been asked to fill in. And he would do deliberately bad jokes. Oh, he would do. He did. Farmyard impersonation. He'd do a cow. He'd do a chicken. And he'd say to the audience, that's all I can do. And there was one part of the performance. Oh, that's right, he'd tell a terrible joke. He'd tell an absolutely terrible joke. But it was just funny enough to get a little bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
And he would jump up and down and shout into the wings, they laugh, they laugh. He would say, I'll tell it again. And he would tell the same joke. And of course the audience, no idea what was going on. There would be this long pause, and this was the moment I thought was utter genius. He would walk forward and say to the audience, please laugh.
Yeah.
And then he'd say, please laugh, my mother's here. And then he'd look up at the balcony for a time and say, oh, it's all right, she's gone.
And he got out of show business?
Yeah. He went back to the laboratory. But it was very funny because about a third of the audience thought it was hilarious. And 2/3 of the audience were embarrassed. I mean, they couldn't.
Now, in those early shows, and however much there was a lineage in England for the kind of humor you were doing, in America, it had to be very, very fresh and new when you brought Cambridge Circus over. Did the audience, I just don't know how, when I think of my parents, I don't know how it worked. Because my dad loved Benny Hill and Hee Haw, so how were those early shows? Were people mystified? Obviously it went over
Two
because...
different things. First of all, there was Cambridge Circus, and that was quite conventional humor. There were moments of silliness, but it was relatively conventional. And we toured New Zealand with it, and we came to America, and we opened it and got a phenomenal response on the opening night. And then, as we were celebrating in Sardines, a guy came in with a long face and a copy of the New York Times, and we got a terrible review of the New York Times. Terrible. And we got 5 good reviews, and the other 5 New York papers, and we were off after 3 weeks. But the audience got that. But when we started doing Monty Python, we knew. I said to Michael, I say in the book, Just before we recorded the first show, Michael and I were standing there watching, waiting for Graham and Terry Jones to do the first sketch about flying sheep.
Yeah, flying sheep.
And I remember I really said to Michael, you know, it's just occurred to me we could be the first people in history to record an entire show to complete silence. And Michael said, I was thinking the same thing. We really didn't know. But we found an audience, a small audience, early enough, and a guy came over from America, from WGBH Boston.
Right.
And he'd heard good things about the show, and he wanted to meet us and watch a couple of shows. And we all sat in the same room, we watched a couple of shows with him, and when the lights went up, he was pale. It was as though he'd seen a ghost, because he thought if I brought this to America, I would be fired the next day. It was so cheeky and irreverent and silly. And
structurally, you do things like the credits at the beginning.
Yes,
you know,
credits at the beginning. So he was, and he was terrified. Really? And he disappeared. And what happened was that a guy that I got to know well called Victor Lowndes, he used to run the Playboy Club in London, which was the one that made all the money for the Playboy organization because it had gambling. None of the other ones did. And he called me in and he said, I love Monty Python. I really love it, he said. But it's never going to get in American television. I said, I know. And he said, let's make a film out of the best sketches, because that can then play on the college cinemas. And we made a little film from the best sketches called it, and that's something.
Oh, okay.
It made less money than they spent on advertising. It was a total disaster, and it was only after we finished doing Monty Python, which was 73 or 74, that we made Holy Grail, and that was when we broke through. Then as a result of Holy Grail, people started to like Python, and then the television companies, beginning in Dallas, if you believe, first PBS station to show Python was Dallas.
So what year would this have been, approximately?
74 or 5. And there was a guy who ran the Dallas station who's been a friend of ours ever since, and when we put it out, all the other PBS stations calling him the next morning saying, Ron de Villiers, his name is Ron, how did it go? And they didn't know if people had gone and burned the studio down. They really had no idea how it was going to be received. And everyone liked it.
And you'd made, which movies had you made at that point? When it first played in America, which films, features?
That was the second one we made. The first one was the sketches.
Right.
Something completely different. The second one was Holy Grail.
Right. Now, but what about Jabberwocky? What was that?
Jabberwocky
compilation.
That was a Terry Gilliam film, but both Michael Palin and Terry Jones had parts in.
Okay, I've never seen it, obviously, sorry.
Holy Grail was the breakthrough, and after that, and now there's more enthusiasm in America for Python than there is in England.
Yeah, I think that Americans weren't gonna, it took a while.
It just takes a while. My experience is that if I do anything that's original, it takes quite a while. When I made Fawlty Towers, the newspaper critics didn't like it at the start. The guy who used to read scripts and advise the head of Light Entertainment wrote the script, and I got the letter. He said, I've read this script. It is full of cliched situations and stereotypical characters, and I cannot see it being anything other than a disaster. And this was not a passing plumber. This was a guy whose job it was to assess scripts.
Right.
So I've always had this experience that when my stuff starts, it takes people a bit of time.
Fish Called Wanda did well.
Terrible review in the New York Times. Something about the accumulating dimness of this enterprise defies description.
That's some writing, boy.
That's it?
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. You see, this was a guy called Canby, I think.
Yes, Canby, yes.
And he just thought that Fish Called Wanda was absolutely terrible. And he finished up taking 200 worldwide and winning 3 Oscar nominations, and Kevin got an Oscar for it. But this is the New York Times guy. So what you begin to realize, and it's quite reassuring, as William Goldman, the screenwriter, says, nobody knows.
Yeah.
You know, you never know whether something's going to be a success. People, when they read of a success, they always think that it was kind of predestined.
Yes, they always give everyone the credit for knowing how great this thing was that they were doing.
And it's all luck. Have you read The Black Swan?
No.
It's a wonderful book by a guy called Nicholas Tulloch. And it's changed my life because he's convinced me that we really are utterly unable to foretell the future. And he quotes research that's been done, a fellow called Tetlock at the University of Pennsylvania, who went to all the political and the economic gurus, you know, all the pundits, and asked them to forecast what was going to happen 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. Hopeless. All of them, absolutely hopeless. And these are the guys who spend their lives studying it.
Right.
And when you start reading, you really relax after that. You know, the idea that we can ever do anything to make this ridiculous world sane and sensible and unselfish, it's absurd.
And isn't that at the core somewhat of what Monty Python is saying about the world? And I want to tell you a story from a friend of mine. His name is Steve Meisner. He lives in Chicago. He had a difficult childhood, and his father was a tyrant, and really kind of tortured him a little bit. And he told me, because I told him I was going to interview you, that when he was 11 years old, he was with his sister at an older kid's house, and he said, "I'm going to watch this show. We have to go watch this Monty Python show." Yeah. And he said, I sat down, and it was the first time I felt like the world made sense suddenly, because of what you guys were, what was at the core of that show, what it says about people, that you can laugh at them, they're clowns, that adults are.
It's all, everything that's going on is absurd. You know, we've arrived here on the planet. We've no idea why we're here. Is there a purpose? Nobody knows. Nobody even bothers to talk about it. Is there an afterlife? No, but there's football on the television. It's all completely crazy.
Yes.
And once you accept that, it's enormously liberating because you realize that almost nothing matters.